Vanakkam. Welcome back. And before we introduce the next speaker, during the break there was some of you had inquiries about how to contribute to Tamil Heritage Trust in terms of donation. Where is Shiva? Yeah. So if you have any questions, please contact Shiva. Shiva is here. You can meet him during the next break. Right? Thank you very much.
You can say that we accept cash.
We accept cash, check. Yeah. At this point of time, not yet UPO, but yeah, Shiva is your contact person. Yeah. Thank you very much. We'll now go to the next talk for this event. Yesterday, you would have had a lecture by Dr. Shivanagi Reddy on the architecture of various temples, right? Across Vijayanagara. Our next talk is going to be a deep dive into the architecture of Hampi, the monuments in Hampi, and a perfect deep dive into Hampi. To deliver this lecture, we have Dr. Manoj Gundanna. Dr. Manoj is a researcher on temple architecture and is an archaeologist by profession. He earned his MA and PhD degrees in ancient history and archaeology from Manasa Gangotri, University of Mysore. Dr. Manoj is also a resource person with the ASI. Dr. Manoj's research work focuses on the study of ancient Dravidian temple architecture based on traditional agamas, besides the study of sculptures and iconography based on ancient Sanskrit texts. He has presented more than 75 research papers both in English and Kannada at various seminars and symposia. He has delivered several lectures online for institutions like the Vibhu Academy, Amrita Darshanam of Amrita Vishwavidyalaya, and others. One of his books, Devalaya Vastu Vijnana in Kannada, is a reference book on Dravidian temple architecture for postgraduate students of history and archaeology. For those who are perhaps listening to Dr. Manoj's lecture for the first time, he was one of the speakers at our Indology festival where he gave a great lecture on the Hoysala architecture and the Hoysala art. With these few words, I welcome Dr. Manoj.
You can have to be on because we are capturing it on camera. Can't control the two lights separately and stuff. Please bear with us.
Namaskaram to everybody. So today the topic is about Vijayanagara architecture with special reference to Hampi and its monuments. Hope I am audible to everybody. So, Hampi was the capital seat of the Vijayanagara Empire, which was in its zenith for almost 300 years till the mid 6th century. And after the decline of the Vijayanagara Empire, we see that many of the customs, rituals and other aspects which were continued, innovated by the Vijayanagara rulers was carried on as a tradition by many of the local chieftains. One of the major contributions of the Vijayanagara emperors has been to the field of temple architecture. Another important thing to be noticed according to the architecture is, by the establishment of Vijayanagara period and the temple construction, other things, even in the textual backdrop, as in the Agamas or the Vastu Granthas, we see it had reached a very matured level, where what happens in the earlier temples like Hoysalas or Badami Chalukyas and others, we do see many architectural adjuncts, and we can find the definitions in the Vastu Granthas like Mayamata, Manasara and various other texts. Of course, Manasara is a very later text. Earliest text available is Mayamata, Kashyapa Shilpa Samhita and all those texts. Even Kashyapa Shilpa Shastra. These texts deal a lot of mention about the architectural adjuncts of the temple. There are specific names given to all these adjuncts, the classification, everything is found. Mayamata is one of the most authentic work because it is very clear in while defining or describing any temple adjunct. As far as the text which we have seen, Mayamata is very clear in its presentation. But by the Vijayanagara period, we saw that there were many other inclusions of mantapas and other things, and even in the earlier lecture we heard about the utsavas and other things. So what he was describing the process of the utsava, now we can see the structural evidences of those utsavas in my presentation. So the utsavas, they became very, very important in the temple culture. The main reason being, until the establishment of Vijayanagara, the local kings, they patronized temple architecture. That was the nucleus of the society. All the activities it was spun around the temple itself. You take it, even legal issues were dealt in the temple premises, the art, architecture and all those discussions, everything was moving around the temple tradition and this thing. But they didn't have an alien invasion which would root it in a very tyrannical way. So now they had to involve the common masses in very huge numbers, and that was the reason all the like Masotsavas, Pakshotsavas and all those utsavas, it is not that earlier it was not known, but it was in practice in some corner in some temple or some very major temple, but the Vijayanagara emperors saw to it that it was introduced in each and every temple so that every person gets involved in it. That is where we start. See what happens in general temple ritual, there is always some distance between the main deity and the devotee, and you have an intermediate factor like a priest or somebody. So however devoted you are to the god, we find there is some distance between us where you don't become a participant. But when it comes to any sort of utsava, each person contributes in his own way. It may be Dolotsava, Kalyanatsava, whatever Pallaki Utsavas and all these Utsavas, each and every member follows it, he participates in it. So he feels that it is his duty or it is his dharma to follow this with this intention. And they also had to show that they were also very powerful, and this power and majesty, it had to be reflected in the structures they built. Especially in Karnataka, what happens from the Kalyan Chalukya and Hoysala periods, they used a softer medium to build the structure. So they were very elegant, very delicate, very intricate, all those kind, but they were never very huge structures. They were all quite humble structures when it comes to the proportions. I'm not talking about the workmanship. Now they had to build huger temples. So that is why Vijayanagara emperors, they adopted the Chola Dravida style. Usually we have two, Karnataka Dravida and the Chola Dravida style. So which could be built in a huger proportion. Another important thing in the Vijayanagara architecture was they gave so much importance to the architecture part of it that if we observe the temple, we see that they have put enormous effort in creating very beautiful architectural members in the temple than the sculpture. Sculpture finds a kind of deterioration, and of course about sculptures my friend Arjun will be speaking in the next lecture, so I will not go too much into it. But however, the sculptural art finds a kind of decline during the Vijayanagara period, but architecturally they have taken very great efforts to build that too with such a hard stone, and the proportions which are very mammotic, they are very huge, the pillars, which in the course of my lecture I will show. So with this challenge, the Vijayanagara people, they started building huge temple complexes, and by that period what the modern concept of temple we have had reached its complete form. Before that, what happens? In Belur temple, for example, we find a reference of Ranga Mantapa. But there are not many other mantapas of the Hoysala period we see there. If you go to some other temple, of course, Malika and such architectural adjuncts, they were familiar with it. But a temple possessing all the adjuncts, it took its advent during the Vijayanagara period. See, this is the temple plan of Vijayavittala temple in Hampi. Here we can see that all the mantapas which mentioned for the various utsavas. See what happens, generally agamas mention about the utsavas. Separate pavilions is an option of the builder. They do not mention that each and every utsava has to be conducted in a separate pavilion. But it's the builder's choice. Suppose it's a very important city or important pilgrim place where many people come, where many people gather, naturally you will need more mantapams. But if it is some humble village or some less populated area, they do not need to build such huge structures for the minimum population which visits the the festivities and other things. So this Vijayavittala temple, if I move the arrow, is it visible what I am showing? Yes. So these three parts of the temple, that is the Garbhagriha, Antarala and Guda Mantapa, it is a continuation. We find without this no temple is complete. All these are the very essential adjuncts of a temple. Now I'll first discuss the ground plan of the temple and then talk about the elevation. So after that, by the Vijayanagara period, this Mahamantapa becomes a very important adjunct. Mahamantapa had two purposes, and again I will tell you, it is not that these mantapas were unknown to the earlier rulers or builders. Everything was there, but the proportion, the utility, and it should be a part of it, that was not very mandatory. Because Mahamantapas we find even in the Kalyana Chalukya temples and Hoysala temples, but their form and their utility was completely different from what we find during the Vijayanagara period. So this Mahamantapa was usually, it served multi-purposes. It was not just one thing. Many of the activities of the temple, especially the Rangabhoga or the services of music and dance for other things, which was usually done in the Guda Mantapa in the earlier days, was brought out to the Mahamantapa. And if there is a temple in some, as I said, in a remote place without much architectural adjuncts around it, all the utsavas were done in the Mahamantapa itself. Even in the Tamil region, you must have observed that there are many Mahamantapas with stone rings to show that Dolotsava could be conducted in that particular mantapa itself. Dolotsava is the swing festival. And after the establishment of the Vijayanagara Empire, we also find they did not build new temples, but they also extended all the earlier temples, which were humble structures. Every temples were provided with all these mantapas. Now after the Mahamantapa, these two are the Mukhamantapas. And this is one kind of Pradakshina Patha. Actually, in the architectural thing, we have two varieties of temples called as Sandhara and Nirandhara. Sandhara is a temple which will have a Pradakshina Patha, or a circumambulatory path within the temple premises surrounding the Garbhagriha, which will be part of the main temple. Nirandhara is one which is void of that. Majority of the temple, especially post 10th century temples, they are all Nirandhara. But Vijayanagara people adopted the earlier kind, but we cannot say it is a Sandhara temple, because this Pradakshina Patha which goes around the Garbhagriha and Antarala, it is not the unit of the main temple. It was built as a separate pavilion around the Garbhagriha with a very small gap in between both the kapothas of the structure, so that some light would enter in. We find such Pradakshina Pathas even in Kalahasti and such places. But in Vijayanagara, almost all the temples like Pattabhirama temple in Kamalapura, Balakrishna temple, Vijayavitla temple, all these temples have this kind of Pradakshina Patha which you can come around, but it is the part of the main structure. Again, it is not built into the main structure. It is it's separate from the nucleus of that is the Garbhagriha part. Then we have the Kalyana Mandapa. Kalyana Mandapa is the pavilion where Kalyanotsava is conducted. Kalyanotsava and Vasanta Mantapas were two mantapas where Vijayanagara sculptors have invested a lot of effort, because both the utsavas are very colorful and it has to be performed with some, it's a happy and gayful performances. So they have taken extra care, and in many instances stone from other places were imported to build the inner part of the Kalyana Mandapa. So Kalyana Mantapas and the Vasanta Mantapas, they will be very highly ornate, very intricate, and the amount of, that's what I said, the sculptors in the two from a hard medium like granite, they have brought out such intricate carving that Kalyana Mantapas are very good examples to understand the sculptural skill of the Vijayanagara sculptors. Vasanta Mantapas are also the same. Then we have what is called as the Ranga Mantapa. Ranga Mantapas are the places, those mantapas where there will be a dais or a platform built to the rear wall of the mantapa. Here various performances and like this Harikatha and such drama, dances, everything used to happen, and there was a hypostyle pavilion where people could be seated and accommodated. The rear wall will have a stage. So Rangamantapa was a separate structure. Until then we don't find a separate Rangamantapa in the temples. In the earlier temples we do not find. There are very stray references which is then Malika is again, Malika is the Prakara Mantapa as it's colloquially called, the pavilion which surrounds the built attached to the Prakara wall. Malika was also known in the earlier temples also, but the utility of Malikas becomes more during the Vijayanagara period, because they are turned as they housed the pilgrims and others, people who came on pilgrimage. They stayed in the Malikas, they had to cook there, they had to use that as the residential quarter. So we find that many such accommodations were made in the Malikas also. We can see even in some of the dilapidated temples in Hampi, there are some grinding stones and such things provided in the Malika, so that the Yatrarthis who come to the temple, they could cook some food and have it there. So this is the complete forum. And another important addition which became very prominent in the Karnataka Andhra region especially, because it was already existent in the Chola region in a very minor scale, that is a separate shrine for Amman, the Devi shrine. In late Chola we find that Devi shrines were being built, because what happens in the earlier temples, if we see, invariably if it is a Shaiva temple, Linga itself will have all the forms. Linga is one way it is considered as Trimurti. If you have another perception, it is Ardhanarishwara. So you don't separate the Devi from this thing. And even in Vaishnava temples, up to one point what happens, it is Srivatsa. In Srivatsa the Devi resides. So this inseparable concept was there, and there was no separate shrine for Amman. But by the period, I think it's in Ishwar Samhita, the reference where it says Srivatsaga Yoga Lakshmi, Bhoga Lakshmi tu Parshvaga, Tritiye Dvitiye Tritiya Avarane, Pratishtitam Veera Lakshmi. So this is mentioned. So probably it was because with all these Utsava, Shayanotsava was introduced. So in Shayanotsava, the Lord had to go to the premises of the Devi. So for that purpose, a separate Shayana Mantapa or the Devi shrine was built as this thing. So this appears from the Vijayanagara period, especially in the Karnataka region, all the Amman shrines. As I said, one or two examples like that, one in Tonnur, they are pre-Vijayanagara, but majority of the temples are during the Vijayanagara period. Now this is the aerial view of the Arthutraya temple, where we see all the adjuncts what we saw in the ground plan. Now on plans also, the Shastra Granthas mention various kinds like Chaturashra, Ayata, Vrittayata, Vritta and all these things. But the most popular this thing we find. Can you off this fan? Sorry. Majority of the temples are built in the Chaturashra plan only. Then there are few examples of Ayata temples, because Ayata temple houses group deities, like more than one deity, like Saptamatrikas or Shayanamurtis. If you are installing Shayanamurtis, they have to be done in a Ayata plan. But during Vijayanagara period, we also find there is one solitary example from Karnataka where the plan is Vrittayata. It is the Ranganatha temple. So here all these plans were adopted by the Vijayanagara ruler during the Vijayanagara period and built. So this is Ramachandra temple, and these texts mention that a shrine which is built intending a female deity. They do not specifically mention Devi shrine, but a shrine built intending a female deity, that has to be Ayata. It should be rectangular in plan. So only standing figures can be accommodated in Chaturashra, but otherwise a Devi shrine should be Ayata or rectangular on plan. So that is why here we see that the main Ramachandra temple is square on front, Chaturashra, but the Devi shrine is rectangular. If you observe the superstructure, it clearly shows that it's a rectangular on plan. Even where in instances you may feel that the Devi shrine is square, because the superstructure may not be like this. But if you measure and observe, there will be little difference, and the rectangular plane is maintained for the Amman shrine. See, this is one Ayata shrine from Ananta Shayanagudi near Hampi. This was intended for Shayanamurti. So another important addition of the Vijayanagara period, from here on, if you observe, in the coming talk I can tell. The upper part of the temple, that is of the Shadvargas, the lower three Shadvargas continued to be stone, but the upper three Vargas, they replaced it with mortar, brick and wood. Again, this was also known earlier during the Ganga Nalamba period. There are many type of temples which are called as Mishra type of temples, Mishra Madhyama as they are called. But in Vijayanagara period, it becomes a rule where all the superstructures are the Vargas above the Prastara. They are of brick, mortar and wood. Two main reasons was the temple building activity became very extensive during the Vijayanagara period. Each and every village of that region, they started having prominent temples. The temples were being extended. So the work process became it was very busy. For this process, if you are doing things with stone, the time taken will be too much. So the use of brick and mortar will reduce the time and labor when compared to the stone. Second reason was they had to show many of especially the Raj Gopuras, they had to be proportionately very tall, not like the earlier ones. So to achieve that height, it was an easier, because it is comparatively lighter. The Mahadwara can bear the weight of the superstructure above. If the entire thing has to be built in stone, then the foundation part has to be very strong. So with these two reasons, the use of brick and mortar along with wood became very much in the Vijayanagara temples. See, this is the Vrittayata Vinyasa. We find it's not in Hampi proper, but it belongs to the Vijayanagara period. It is in a place called Rangasthala near Chikbalapura. So you can see that it is a oval plan. Here it is taking a curve. So this is from Rangasthala. Vijayanagara period during Vijayanagara period, there is another system among the sculptors which we can observe. One, wherever there are many regional temples which are built in Kolar, in and around Kolar, or maybe somewhere in Tamil Nadu. There, when the Vijayanagara people built the temples, they have continued and adopted many of the features which were locally present. So many times, see, some temple you can identify it and say it is Hoysala style, it is such and such a style. But what happens, the Vijayanagara period, this is the same problem with the Rashtrakuta temples also. Rashtrakuta Empire was also so expansive that many times if they built a temple somewhere in Baroda or somewhere in Madhya Pradesh, they had to follow whatever the regional system and custom was prevalent. So naturally, Rashtrakuta temples had various regional variants. Like that, in the Vijayanagara temples also, we find a lot of regional variants where we see, for example, there are few temples in Kolar. We can see that the Vijayanagara sculptors have adopted and continued the Nolamba architectural features in their temples. So like this was another feature which we find in the Vijayanagara temples. Now this is Amman shrine from Ramchandra temple. As I said, we can see that it is a rectangular shrine built for Sita Mahalakshmi. But of course this did not have a separate image of Sita. The image in it was Lakshmi itself. Now this is the Mahamantapa, which was I telling. Usually Mahamantapa was a spacious hypostyle hall with various pillars in it, and they had a particular method in the arrangement of pillars. All the pillars which came inside in the aisle of the temple, they would be of Chitrakanda variety. Whichever comes to the periphery of which faces the courtyard, to the periphery of the Mahamantapa, they were all Samyukta Stambhas of various varieties. I will talk about it while I talk about the Samyukta Stambhas. So the outer temple's pillars would be the composite pillars with Vyalas and pillarets like that. The inner one will be Chitrakanda variety. This is another addition made during the Vijayanagara period. This is called as the Patalankana. Usually the Mahamantapa or any Mukhamantapa or any Mantapa will be built on an elevated platform. Mayamata defines a Mantapa as the structure with the Adhisthana, 4 pillars and a canopy above is a Mantapa. That is the definition we find in Mayamata. But Vijayanagara period, what happens, as the requirement increases, they also start extending the Mukhamantapas or Mahamantapas with a Mantapa which doesn't have a elevated platform or a foundation, but it rises from the ground level of the courtyard itself. So these again had to have taller pillars, massive pillars, and these Mantapas were called as Patalankana. And this Patalankana is a term which you don't find in the texts as is. It is found in the inscriptions. Through inscriptions, we know that an architectural addition like Patalankana was made. We can see that here the Mukhamantapa has an elevated platform while the Patalankana is built to the level of the courtyard. This is the Rangamantapa, as I was mentioning. I myself am not able to see the arrow. See, the person, you can see a seated person here. So this is the Ranga or the platform or the stage, and in front of it a hypostyle hall would be built. This is the Rangamantapa. This is a separate Kalyana Mantapa. Kalyana Mantapa, as I said, this is from Vijayavitla temple in Hampi. As I said, they would be very exuberantly decorated. The decoration would be very high. There are very good examples. I think Arjun will be showing some parts of the Kalyana Mantapa for the sculptural details we find in the Kalyana Mantapa. This is a Vasanta Mantapa. This Vasanta Mantapa, which is in good condition, is from Bhoganandishwara temple near Bangalore. This is a dilapidated Vasanta Mantapa from the Achyutaraya temple in Hampi. So Vasanta Mantapa also got the same attention as a Kalyana Mantapa, where the Vasantotsavas were specially performed. This is a Dolotsava Mantapa. So Dolotsava Mantapa is a Mantapa where the swing festival was conducted, and the feature is, as they had to drop a swing, the pillars were tall, the Mantapa was also tall. It was usually taller than the Malika surrounding. It was taller than the Malika surrounding. This is the Malika. See, Malika during the Vijayanagara period also, it becomes very spacious. There will be 2 or 3 bays. It will not be a single bay porch like thing. So 2-3 bays, and it will also have many, as I said, the pillars which face the courtyard will invariably be the Samyukta Stambhas, and the inner pillars will be Chitrakanda Stambhas. This is another Malika. Vahana Mantapas. Now Vahana Mantapas, even from the earlier days, we find 2 varieties. One which is popularly known as the Garuda Mantapa, and the other one is the Nandi Mantapa. Both are Vahana Mantapas. Usually Nandi Mantapas are open pavilions because Nandi is a Pashu Jati. So it is tied to a cow shed. So it's like that. While Garuda is from Pakshi Jati. So it is the shrine which houses the Garuda should be like a cage. So it should be closed on all the sides. So this thing we see. And all the Garuda Mantapas have the Shadvarka concept of the main shrine, what we see in the main shrine. There are many Garuda Mantapas with such examples. But in Hampi, one of the best Garuda Mantapas we find is from the Vijayavittala temple, which is designed in the shape, in the form of a chariot. And as I said, all the architectural members which are used in the main temple can be seen in this particular Vahana Mantapa. Earlier it had a prasada also of brick and mortar. In the 19th century it was removed, fearing the weight may harm the structure below. It was during the British period the structure was removed. Now coming to the elevation of the temple. Usually the elevation of the temple described in the texts are Shadvargas, beginning from the lowest member, that is the Adhisthana. So Adhisthana, Bitti, Prastara, Griva, Shikara and Stupi. These are the Shadvargas of the temple. And of that, Adhisthana, Bitti and Prastara, they occupy more space and more, not only in the structure but also in the text, because there are many varieties, there are a lot of descriptions. The Urdhva Vargas, the 3 upper Vargas, they are usually, they appear to be like one unit. The Griva, Shikara and Stupi, they are one unit. The intermediate place, that is above the Prastara and below the Griva, you can have what is called as Prasada and Talas according to the necessity of the temple. So beginning from the Adhisthana. What happens? Vijayanagara people, as I said, they adopted the Chola mode of building temples. So majority of the Chola temples, they possess what is called as the Padabandha Adhisthana. Now the texts mention 2 major kinds of Adhishthanas. One is Padabandha and Pratibandha, and there are various sub-varieties which are just named after the decorations or some such minor changes of this core original Adhisthana. So Padabandha Adhisthana is a popular Adhisthana which will have a Jagati, a Tripatta Kumuda, a Kumuda, then it has Gala, Mahapatti. These are the 5-6 major Angas of the Adhisthana. But during Vijayanagara what happens? See, this is the Jagati, this is the Kumuda, we have Gala, Mahapatti and a Gala again. Now Vijayanagara period they use Padabandha Adhisthana, but they decorate even that Adhisthana with a lot of lotus petals and such decorations. So with that decoration, it is categorized as a separate. So the popular varieties we find in Vijayanagara temple is either Padmaka Adhisthana or Padmakesara Adhisthana. Padmakesara Adhisthana is the same Padabandha Adhisthana with decoration of lotus petals in all the intermediate Angas, main Angas like Kumuda, Jagati, Mahapatti. So wherever you find this minute, Kesara means something like minor polans like. So wherever you find minor decorations of Padmadalas, it is a Padmakesara Adhisthana. It is the same Padabandha Adhisthana with just a change in the decoration. Otherwise, they will have a simple Padma in the below the Jagati, which will make it a Padmaka Adhisthana. And another thing is, in the earlier temples, Upapita was very optional. Upapita was not very mandatory. The texts mention the purpose of Upapita is Shobhartham, Unnatartham and Dhardhyartham, to increase the height, to give stability and to match with the beauty of the structure. During Vijayanagara period, almost all the structures, as I said, proportionally they became huger. Therefore, all the adhishtanas will possess a upapita, and invariably the upapita is of the Pratibhadra variety. So in Hampi especially, it is invariably Pratibhadra upapita with a Padmakesara or Padmaka adhishtana. So Padabandha adhishtana is not totally absent, but it is very, especially in minor shrines, in Parivaralayas or smaller structures, they implement Padabandha adhishtana. Then Shri Bandha adhishtana and Shri Bhoga adhishtana, they come to the forefront during the Vijayanagara period. And Shri Bhoga adhishtana is one adhishtana which is mentioned in Manasara. So Manasara is a contemporary text of the period. The composition of Manasara happened during the Vijayanagara period itself. Therefore, probably they might have seen the structures and included into the text also. The probabilities are there. So Shri Bandha, as the name itself mentions, the adhishtana becomes very, very luxurious, and it's very prosperous in appearance. So Shri Bandha, what happens? It has the same parts. The parts are same Jagati, the same Kumuda, same Gala, same Mahapatti. But each and every part is decorated with extra care and more effort. So we can see that the Shri Bandha has a Padmaka Jagati with a Katakavrita Kumuda and a Kapota. Everything is intricately carved. Now, if the same Shri Bandha adhishtana is even more decorated with additional adjuncts, it becomes a Shri Bhoga adhishtana. This Shri Bhoga adhishtana was especially used in the Mahamantapas, Kalyana Mantapas and the Vasanta Mantapas of the Vijayanagara period. So what was the major inclusion of the Shri Bhoga adhishtana is, see, we can see the Kapota, literally the Kapota is not visible at all. We find a very closely knit nasis with a small carvings inside it, and the Kumuda is also Katakavrita, and the addition is what we find an adjunct here, which is called as the Devakullaka. Devakullaka was earlier an independent structure during the Hoysala period. It was a small miniature temple-like structure built around the temple. During the Vijayanagara period, this Devakullaka is attached to the adhishtana, and this, and each and every detail of the Shadvargas we can find intricately carved in the Devakullaka also. See, this Devakullaka has a separate adhishtana, bitti, prastara, griva, shikara and stupi about. All the Shadvargas are depicted in the Devakullakas, in the adhishtana. So if the adhishtana possesses this, it becomes a Shri Bhoga adhishtana. What was built in Hampi or the capital seat was followed in throughout the Vijayanagara Empire. And this is an example from Tirchangod. In Tirchangod Ardhanareshwara temple, there is a shrine which is called as a Ratha, and that has a Shri Bhoga adhishtana. Here also we can see that each and every adjunct is highly decorated. Coming to the Bitti. Now, the decoration of the Bitti during the Vijayanagara period, invariably it possessed the Bittipadas or the pilasters and the Kumbhapanjaras. Kumbhapanjaras were that decoration which was mainly popularized by the Cholas. We find Kumbhapanjaras in the Raja Brihadishwara temple itself. The parallel to Kumbhapanjara in the Karnataka Dravida style was the Stambha Panjara. But the proper Kumbhapanjaras entered the Karnataka Dravida temples and region during the Vijayanagara period. It was during this period that Kumbhapanjara became very popular in almost all the temples of Karnataka. And as I said, there were many adjuncts, additions made to the earlier temples of Hoysalas or others during the Vijayanagara period. So we find the addition of Kumbhapanjaras and such decorative motifs during the Vijayanagara period in such temples. Like Belur temple has a Mahadwara and Rayagopura built during the during the reign of Bukkaraya. There we find all these Kumbhapanjaras and such decorations. So Kumbhapanjara and Bittipadas become the major decoration, As I said, there are references of sculpture on the wall, but neither the quantity nor the quality is that good. There are some temples with more number of sculptures on the wall, but the presentation and the carving is not very impressive as we see in the Hoysala temples or something like that. See, this is a Bitti with Shilpalankara. This is from Ramachandra temple, that is Hajar Rama temple in Hampi. The entire story of Ramayana is carved in 3 rows. If you take 3 pradakshams around the temple, we can see the complete Ramayana story. But as I said, there are very rare references, and the quality of the workmanship is also not up to the mark. This was again followed by the local traditions, local temples. This is from Venugopala Swami in Devanhalli. And by then, by the Vijayanagara period, the popular narration that Ahalya emerged from a stone, it became very earlier. Actually, in the original Ramayana, that's the Valmiki Ramayana, there is no mention of Ahalya being a stone or she emerging out of a stone. Such description you don't find. In the later tradition, maybe oral or in some other kavyas also. So that comes. That thing we see that it is sculpted on it had become very popular. So in the Vijayanagara period, we find the instances where Ahalya is shown as emerging from the stone. See, this is, as I said, Kumbhapanjara was widely used during the Vijayanagara period, especially on the Bitti and the Mahadwaras also. But there were very excellently carved Kumbhapanjaras with a lot of decoration. They seemed as if it is completely, the relief was so high, because not all the Kumbhapanjaras are of high relief. But the Vijayanagara Kumbhapanjaras in Hampi, Hacharrama temple and Balakrishna temple, you feel as if it is almost in the round. So it is protruding to that great extent, and the carving is also very intricate. And the Kumbhapanjara can be actually paralleled with the verse of Bana from Harshacharita, where it is said, Trailokya Nagararambu Mulastambhaya Shambhave Navastunga Shiras Chumbi Chamra Chandra Chamra Charave, where the Bana pays obedience to Shiva, mentioning him as the Mulastambha of the Trilokas, the 3 worlds. So in the Kumbhapanjara we see that a stambha, which is the form of Shiva, emerges from a pot, and Kumbha is usually depicts the creation and the world, because Apomayamidam Jagat is the basic principle out of which the creation has started. So Kumbha depicts the water, and stambha is this thing, and the pavilion above the stambha is the mantapa. And there are some inscriptional reference with the prayer. This particular prayer was widely used by Kalyana Chalukyas. In there they mentioned Moola Mandapaya Stambhave itself. So the relation between an architectural member and its metaphysical symbolism can be seen in Kumbhapanjara. Then coming to the third varga, the Prastara. Prastara usually is of the Chola type, continuation of the Chola type, but the Kapotha used during the Vijayanagara period of 2 kinds. It was mixture of both Karnata and Tamil Dravida styles. It was a mixture. So the main shrine, that is the Garbhagriha, the Ardhamantapa and the Gudamantapa parts, they will have the regular Kapotha, the pigeon head shaped variety of Kapotha. But when you come to the Kapothas of the Mahamantapas or Kalyana Mantapas or independent pavilions, the European scholars call it an S-shaped Kapotha. It becomes a Kapotha which this is actually a Kapotha which we widely see in Kalyana Chalukya, Hoysala and those temples. So it will resemble the woodwork a lot. If you see the lower portion of these Kapothas, we can see that beams and pavilions, the tenons, and they are being carved in the lower portion of the Kapotha. So this is called as the double flexed Kapotha, which becomes very popular building the Mahamantapas and the other this thing. Then the Urdhva Vargas, that is the Griva, Shikara and the Stupi. What happens during the Vijayanagara period, as I mentioned earlier, the separating them becomes very difficult because they are no more depicted as three separate parts. They all get merged because the entire thing is built out of brick and mortar, and it is not a solid structure. It doesn't need a Vedi or something to support it, above which a Griva is placed and the Shikara is separately placed. And the Stupi, till the Hoysala period, stone Stupis were consecrated above the Shikaras. But during the Vijayanagara period, it becomes a Loha one. It's invariably a metal one. So therefore, they needed was to place the pivot of the Kalasha. They needed a hole in the pinnacle of the Stupi, the Shikara. So the entire thing becomes one unit, and even the text mention a range of Shikaras like Swastika Shikara, Sri Vishala Shikara, Vaijayanta, Shrikara. These are all the names of various Vimanas we get as them, the Prasadas. But during Vijayanagara period, what happens? For the convenience of building it, it is usually a square platform above which a cylindrical or a domical Shikara is placed. So the nearest agamic name you can give for a Vijayanagara Shikara is the Sri Vishala. Sri Vishala is the nearest one which can find. And all these Tritala, Dvitala, everything, it's a bit confusing during the Vijayanagara period because they do it according to whatever is suitable for that particular structure or that particular period. So the earlier identification of Shikaras becomes very difficult and insignificant during the Vijayanagara period. Sumangala Shikara continues because almost all the Amman shrines are rectangular on plan, and the texts mention for how many ever talas you are giving, name for a rectangular prasada is Sumangala. It is the general name given. So Sumangala Shikara continues with the same form. This is another example of building Shikara during the Vijayanagara period. Especially in Hampi, we find a lot of temples built to the rock crops. That is the boulders which are in situ, they carve the relief of the sculpture. That's how we find that there are some temples which are not completely destroyed by the invaders. All the temples, that is the Rama in the Malyavant Raghunatha temple or the Kodan Rama temple at Pampa, the Uddhana Veerabhadra temple, they are intact because the Moolavar or the votive sculpture, it is not an independent sculpture which is installed there. It is actually a relief sculpture which is carved on a natural boulder. So in Malyavant Raghunatha temple we see the seated figures of Sita and Rama along with Lakshmana, which is carved on a boulder. Attached to that boulder they have constructed the forepart of the Garbhagriha, then the Antarala, and then all the other adjuncts. Now what happens, as the image is a relief sculpture on the boulder, now and it is not surrounded by a Garbhagriha. Garbhagriha is also partial. So they have built a Shikara above the boulder on which the sculptures are relieved. So this is one example from Malyavanta Raghunatha temple. Such examples we get even in the Uddhana Veerabhadra temple, where from the natural boulders wherever they have carved the this thing. And with I think that will be covered in the sculpture. Vijayanagara period we find a lot of huge monolithic sculptures carved in situ. Wherever there is a huge stone crop found, like Ugra Narasimha of Hampi, we have Kadale Kalu Ganapati, all these are carved out of the stone which is found there itself. Coming to the next adjuncts of the temple, after the Shadvargas, other major adjuncts are the pillars and various other things. So pillars, as I said, during the Ganga and Olamba period, during the Hoysala period, and all these earlier periods, we find that there are various varieties of pillars adopted both from the northern schools as well as the indigenous schools in the south. And the pillar varieties of Cholas can be understood only through the Bhittipadas, because we do not find many structures with an added Gudamantapa till the 12th century. till then the form of pillars of Chola cannot be distinctly identified. So therefore, the Chola pillar styles can be understood by the Bhittipadas, or the pilasters which are found on the temple walls. But in Hoysala, Badami, Chalukya and all those reasons, we have a lot of independent pillars built according to the descriptions and definitions we find in texts like Mayamata and others. But there is one variety called as Chitrakanda Stamba. Chitrakanda, as the name itself says, it is a pillar which is wrought variously. So where you have a variety of carvings on it, it becomes a Chitrakanda Stamba. So this variety becomes very, very popular during the, otherwise it is probably the only variety of pillar which is used during the Vijayanagara period. In my opinion, I think probably they just used to manufacture pillars, and then wherever it was necessary they used to fit it, because the work was so voluminous. And we find many these varieties of Chitrakanda pillars which are totally unornated. You don't find even a small bud or a flower or petal or any such figure carved on it. It will be very, very plain. They are used for some inner quarters like a kitchen or something like that. Wherever in the temple premises we find it is used in such places. But where you find in Mahamantapas, there you find a lot of relief sculptures carved on them. So Chitrakanda becomes very popular, and one of the best Chitrakanda pillars we find in the Ramachandra temple of Hampi, that is Hajarama temple. And we see that this is a separate kind of stone which is not locally found, but it is imported and then it is carved. The carving is also very intricate. So Chitrakanda Stamba is the popular variety, and Mayamata mentions sub-varieties in Chitrakanda. It says if the shaft has a consequent octagonal and 16 faced bands, then one variety is called as Sri Vajra and the other variety is called as Sri Khanda. So where you have an octagonal shaft, see this shaft is octagonal here, the intermediate band is 16 faced. So this becomes what is called as Sri Khanda. If the same shaft becomes 16 faced and the band is octagonal, then it becomes Sri Vajra. So such sub-varieties of Chitrakanda also can be seen popularized. This the Sri Vajra pillar which I am showing is from Lepakshi, and the Sri Khanda is from Belur. Another variety of stambas which was again popularly used during the Vijayanagara period is the Koshta Stamba. This Koshta Stamba is found during the Hoysala period itself, and one of the best Hoysala Koshta Stamba is found in Belur, which is popularly known as the Narasimha pillar, where the entire shaft of the pillar is decorated with small koshtas or minor miniature shrines carved on them. So Koshta Stamba is another variety which becomes very popular during the Vijayanagara period. See, if you observe why they used Chitrakanda, Koshta Stamba, such varieties is, here the shaft, a single stone can be wrought into the shaft. If you are using other varieties like Brahmakanta, Vishnukanta or others, each pillar has to have 3 or 4 parts and it has to be fixed. So naturally you cannot take it to higher height, it cannot be very tall, and at the same time the stability will also be comparatively less. So that is why they opted for these varieties of pillars. Samyukta Stambas is one of the major contributions of the Vijayanagara rulers. As I said, Samyukta Stambas were also known to the earlier builders and sculptors, but they were used in great numbers only during the Vijayanagara period, especially in Hampi. If you go in and around the temples of Hampi, we can find a wide variety of Samyukta Stambas. And there are some texts which mention about Samyukta Stambas also, like Shilparatna and other texts which mention the Samyukta Stambas, and there are separate names given to those Stambas also. But ironically what happens, this particular Stamba, see what is Samyukta Stamba is usually translated as composite pillar in English. So it is that there will be a main shaft, and attached to that shaft you may have sculptural decoration or pillars, minor pillarets which support the major shaft. So this is the concept of a Samyukta Stambha. So the text mention, based on the decoration, what is the name of that particular Samyukta Stambha. What happens, we don't get name, at least in the text which I have so far seen, a name for a shaft with 3 pillarets. But that is the hugest number of composite pillars you find during the Vijayanagara period. Because it mentions names which I will tell further, but there is no name given for a pillar, Samyukta Stambha, with a main shaft and 3 pillarets. But we probably it suited the placement of the corners of the Mahamantapas. So you can have 3 pillarets facing the courtyard. Probably they have adopted it that way. But there is no name found. But it is very popularly used during the Vijayanagara period. See, then the major kinds of Samyukta Stambhas are the Vyalakanta, Simhakanta and Ashwakanta Stambhas. In Hampi, if you observe, you see only the Vyalakanta Stambhas in great numbers. Almost all the temples, all the pavilions, even Kalyana Mantapas, Ranga Mantapas, wherever you find, it is Vyalakanta. Probably, Vyala is an animal which is supposed to be more powerful than the lion. So that is why, to show the prowess and the capital seat of the empire, they have used only Vyalakanta Stambhas. There are stray references for Simhakanta Stambhas in Hampi, especially in Vijayavitala temple and Virupaksha temple. But Simhakanta Stambhas are again found in other minor places where, the places which were ruled by local chieftains like Palegars or Nayakas or something like that. So Vyalakanta Stambhas are popularly seen in Hampi. Then we have Simhakanta Stambha. See, this Simhakanta Stambha is from the Vijayavitala temple. This concept, which was introduced during the Vijayanagara period, was continued by the Nayaka rulers in Tamil Nadu of 16th century and post 16th century, and they also introduced a lot of other innovations to this main concept, like a stone rolling inside the mouth of the lion and all these things. They were all later introductions into it. There are only 4 Ashwakanta pillars in the entire Hampi. I don't know why Ashwas did not find a place in Hampi. There are only 4 pillars which are of this Ashwakanta variety. That too opposite to the, it's not in the major temple complex. It is to the entrances of a Pushkarini built in the market of Vijayavitala, opposite to the Vijayavitala temple. So and it is called as Kudure Bombay Kamba in locally by Hampi people. It is called as Kudure Bombay Kamba. But in south, as we come down south, we find that this Ashwakanta Stambhas has gained a lot of prominence. Almost in all the regions, like even in Salem region where I worked for my PhD, it is invariably Ashwakanta Stambhas we find, and of course Madurai and other places there are a lot of Ashwakanta Stambhas. Now, the main shaft having the number of pillarets, the text mention certain names. Supratikanta Stambha is that Samyukta Stambha where the main shaft will have only one Upastambha. Upastambha is the pillaret which is built into the main shaft. So this is a Supratikanta Stambha, and again this pillar also we find in huge numbers because it facilitated building the Malikas. This is Suryakanta Stambha, but the description is not exactly to what we find in the texts. The texts say that there should be 2 Upastambhas on the either sides of the shaft. But what we find in Hampi is all the 2 Upastambhas are to the front of the shaft and not on the either sides. But we can consider this as Suryakanta based on the number of Upastambhas. Here it is from Virupaksha, Kalyana Mantapa of Virupaksha. Then this is Samyukta Stambha of the Brahmakanta variety, where it should have 4 Upastambhas on all 4 sides. This is a Shivakanta Stambha, and this is not from Hampi. It is from a place called Nuggihalli. Nuggihalli is a place where we have a Hoysala temple, and there is one front mantapa built during the Vijayanagara period. So Shivakanta Stamba is that variety of Stamba which is mentioned in Manasara. It says this Samyukta Stamba should be void of a main shaft and it should possess 5 pillarets, 5 Upastambas. So here we can see that there are 4 Upastambas on the 4 corners and 1 central Upastamba. These are all very rare instances of such examples we find. Then, now as I mentioned, that the majority of the temples were of Chitrakanda variety, so it did not possess the description of the general pillars like Brahmakanta, Vishnukanta pillars, as mentioned in the texts we find. But the Upastambas had all the angas of a main stamba, what we call as Savayava Stamba, Stamba with all the organs, that is called as the Savaya Stamba. So usually a Stamba should have a Pitha or a base, then the Danda. Above the Danda we find what is called as Tadi. Above the Tadi we will have Mandi and Palaka. Above this you can have a Potika. These are the important parts of a pillar. So Upastambas were almost all the Upastambas had possessed all these Shadangas, 6 Sangas, and there are a lot of pillar varieties we can find in the Upastambas. For instance, this is a Palika Stamba. Palika Stamba is a pillar which will have flutings in 32 in number. So that is a Palika Stamba. This is a Upastamba of the Kumbha variety, Kumbha Upastamba. Now, this variety of Samyukta Stamba, it doesn't find a mention in the text, but it is widely found used by the Vijayanagara sculptors. This is where we find a sculpture attached to the main shaft. It was innovated by the Vijayanagara rulers, but it was later developed by the Nayakas and other patrons we find. So in the Samyukta Stambas with the Puthli we find many varieties. See, Kumbha Panjara, which was a decorative motif on the Bhitti, by the Aravedu dynasty time it becomes a decorative motif of the Stamba. We can find a Kumbha Panjara carved as a decoration of the Stamba. And this is the Stamba of a Kalyana Mantapa from Bhoganandeshwara temple. See, it is so intricately carved. It is a Vijayanagara period structure which has imitated the workmanship of the Hoysala sculptors. Here we can feel all the minute details like mango leaves, mango flowers, lotus, rows of lotus petals, and with parrots on them. And we also have some semi and demi divine sculptures carved all around. So this is this kind of Samyukta Stambas we find in the Kalyana Mantapas. Now, especially in the Vijayavitala temple Mahamantapa, we have a range of Samyukta Stambas where we can know the freedom a sculptor had in expressing his ideas. So we can actually call it as Mishra Jati Samyukta Stambas, because it is not, it has all the definitions or all the designs we find in separate pillars put into one pillar. So this is Mahamantapa from Vijayavitala temple. Here we have to just not notice the decoration of the pillar. We have to, it is very astonishing to see how such huge stone, monolithic stone slabs were transported from one place to the other. Because this pillar, if you see, the height of the pillar may be easily 10 to 12 feet. So the girth would be some 6 feet or 7 feet. With this, imagine the original form of that monolithic, because pillars cannot be, it has to be monolithic in the case of Mahamantapas and the Chitrakanda variety. So such huge stones were transported, and employed. So these are varieties where we can find upastambas and sculptures put together. See, this is yet another variety. See, this is actually a Brahmakanta Samyukta Stamba with a sculpture added to it. See, this is Simmakanta Stambas with the pillarets in between. So it is a mixture of Supratikanta and Simmakanta put together. See here, here you can see the Chitrakanda Stamba is provided with what is called as Bhadraka Stamba. Bhadraka Stambas are usually pillars built into the wall of the Garbhagriha or any structure to give more strength to the structure. So here we find the carving of a Bhadraka Stamba also in the Samyukta Stamba. And in later period, from Aravidu period onwards, as I said, the Patalankana became more popular. The tall pious pillars, 2 levels of Samyukta Stambas came to be introduced. And in 2 levels we can see this, the lower portion is a Vyalakanta Stamba, but the upper one is a Supratikanta Stamba with a sculpture added to it. These pillars are all very tall and very huge in proportions. So these are all 2 level Samyukta Stambas, various examples. So this is about Devakullakas. As I said, Devakullakas are miniature shrines, representations of a major Shadvargas, and in this Devakullakas usually we find there are divine sculptures relieved inside the rear wall of the Kullaka, and it is found around the Adhisthana. But in Hampi we find instances where royal figures and figures of Salabanjikas also carved in the Devakullakas. And Devakullakas along with the Shadvargas, here we can see even it has a Upapita and other such architectural adjuncts built into it. So if you notice a Devakullaka, you can understand the Shadvargas and study it in a... See, this is the Upastambas of Devakullakas. Here you can find it in many temples in Tamil Nadu also, where a Devakullaka will have small pillarites relieved from the core stone on either sides. So this is a very difficult task. Now Pranala is the water chute which drains out the tirtha out of the Garbhagriha. So usually we find the construction of a Pranala with the tirtha patra from the earlier days. But here we can find that the tirtha patra is built into the Adhisthana itself. This is from Vijayanagara, Vijayavithala temple in Hampi. So this shows during Vijayanagara period, along with following the norms of the text, they also did things which facilitated that particular point of time, or because building a separate tirtha patra may take more place. So that is why they have just fixed it into the Adhisthana itself. Coming to the Vitana, Vitana is the ceiling of the temple. So in the earlier days there were varieties of Vitanas, like Ashtadikpalakapattis were there, Bhuvaneshwaris were there, but during Vijayanagara, as I said, the Urdhva Vargas or the upper 3 levels were brick and mortar. So the Vitanas were very simple, either plain stones, or the variety they used was Nabhichanda. Nabhichanda is one particular variety where you find that the stones are placed one above the other in revolving squares, and the uppermost thing is covered with a stone slab or a capstone. See here they have given a elevation to the Nabhichanda capstone also to allow some light and air to come in. It is from Ramachandra Hajar Ramachandra Swami temple. There is a parallel hall where the utsavas are conducted. So to provide light and ventilation, they have used this system. These are all the innovations of the Vijayanagara sculptors we can find. This is from the Kalyana Mantapa, where it resembles the Bhuvaneshwari of the Hoysalas, the carving. Now this is another important technology developed during the Vijayanagara period from the Europeans. By Vijayanagara period we know that there was a lot of movement of Europeans here. This is called the suspension roof system. Now it was during Vijayanagara period what happened, they started decorating the ceilings with paintings. As I said, that saved a lot of time and energy. Earlier there used to be a lot of Bhuvaneshwaris, they need a lot of intricate carving, labor and everything, stone, everything. But for painting, you know, so much of time and energy is not needed. So they have decorated their ceilings with paintings. To do that, they needed a very flat ceiling for longer measurements. It had to be very lengthy, at the same time flat. So they used this suspension roof method, where you can see that there were huge T squares placed above the mantapa on the pillars, and the intermediate space was filled with stone slabs, and the lower portion was pasted with mortar and lime mortar and gare, as we call it, lime mortar. So it would give a very white canvas for doing the paintings. Above that they used to draw and paint. See, this is the lower portion of the, so this is the main beam above which small stone slabs are placed. It gives a very flat this thing. This for use for the Rangamantapas, central bay. So this is the paintings of the Vitana from the Virupaksha temple, where we can see. Now I'll just mention 2-3 construction methodology points of the Vijayanagara period and conclude my talk. See, this is how they have built an Abhichanda Prasada, Vitana. Now Abhichanda, usually if you are building it of stone, they will have stone slabs placed. But as I said, brick and mortar replaced. They have used wooden beams for supporting the brick and mortar above. See, and the pinnacle of it, where the stupi is placed, is just left wide, and the entire thing is hollow inside. They did not fill it because it will become heavier for the structure below. It is hollow inside. So this is for a Sumangal Shikara. We can see that it is rectangular on plan. The top is rectangular on plan, and this is for a regular Chaturashra. So this would be the opening of the Shikara top. So here you can see the decoration of the Shala, Kuta and Panjara is only visible outside. Inside it is just brick and mortar which we see. The building of Raya Gopura of this variety was begun during the Vijayanagara period. It is not that earlier people did not know it, but the proportions were not so huge. And even this Rajagopura, that is why it got the name. Many people misspell it as Rajagopuram. It is not Rajagopuram, it is Raya Gopuram, because Raya was the surname of the Vijayanagara emperors. All the Vijayanagara emperors carried this epithet as Devaraya, Krishnadevaraya and all those Bukkaraya. So Raya was, and Raya is actually the Prakrit form of Raja itself, Raja only. So this Raya Gopurams became very popular. And this is the tallest Raya Gopuram in Karnataka. I am mentioning only about Karnataka. This is the tallest Raya Gopuram in Karnataka. And as I said, this entire Gopuram is hollow inside. It doesn't have any talas, or you cannot, it doesn't have any stairs which leads from one level to the other. So you have to climb through the wooden supports which they give in the corners if you have to perform Kumbhabhishekam. So the inner view of the Raya Gopura would be like this. See, this is the inner view where we have a lot of dilapidated temples in Hampi. If you observe over the Mahadwara, this is how they used to build. And when the invaders, the Islamic invaders, when they destroyed the temples, one method they used was, they used to fill hay and light fire to it, so that it will get the entire thing, because a lot of wood was used. If you observe, all the wooden supports and things is burned down, only the charred bricks are remaining here. So then it would explode out of excess heat. So this is about my presentation on Vijayanagara architecture. Are there any question answer session? Question answer session irukka?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
We will take a few questions.
No, it's a continuation of Vijayanagara style. Yes. No, just not Kerala, the entire, even coastal Karnataka for that matter. See what happens, they have been following the indigenous building style because the environment doesn't support it. If you come to the Thiruvananthapuram belt where the land is plain, Shuchindram and Thiruvananthapuram, you find the same huge thing. But what happens here, the environment doesn't support. So they use, because you cannot transport such huge stone beams, especially in the hilly regions of Malnad. So that's the reason. Even in Sringeri you have the Vijayanagara temple, which was built during the Vijayanagara period. But it is not huge proportionately, that's it.
So my question is regarding the type of rocks which we find. One thing very peculiar to the complete Hampi area is the mountains everywhere, the boulders are different from the general thing. They are void of any growth. Does it have anything to do with sculpturing? Because they are as if they are everything.
So you mean the quality of sculpturing?
The way we look at it, sculpture I am talking about. That is that having any connection to the type of rocks? Because the boulders are all very regular and rounded and as if
they are smoother when compared to the other.
I am talking about the naturally occurring itself, sir.
See what happens there when it comes to the quality of sculpting. During this period, as I said, the work became very massive. So they had to involve various people. So even the people who used to work on wood, Kashta they started doing sculptures on stone. So that is why we find a lot of resemblance with the stone sculptures of Vijayanagara Empire and the wooden dolls. Even today we get some dolls from Tirupati. If you see, many of the Vijayanagara sculptures resemble them a lot. So this involvement has deteriorated the quality of sculpting. Because if you see the effort they have taken to build these pillars and Chitrakanda Stambhas and Samyukta Stambhas, they have done the same intricate work on stone. But I don't know why they didn't take much interest in sculpting.
Sir, Devakullakas.
Pardon? No, they are actually not musical pillars and they were not intended for that. See, Vijayanagara people had great musicians and musical instruments. Nobody needed to beat a stone for producing it. This is just a later, there is nothing later. It's later interpretation.
Sir, Devakullakas found on the base of Vijayavitla temple, they always have Shala Shikaras, isn't it?
Yeah, invariably they have a Shala canopy. Shikaras are Shala.
Okay, thank you.
So you showed us 2 slides on Sri Bhoga Adhisthana. Where was the first slide?
First one is from Vijayavitla temple, Mahamantapa.
Okay.
The second one was from Trichangod.
And these photographs were taken 10 years back.
Maybe.
Has anything changed?
Even earlier.
Has anything changed?
No, not much.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Dr. Manoj. That was a master class in Hampi and its architecture. Thank you very much. Request Sri Mohan to come forward and honor Dr. Manoj. The book that is being presented to Dr. Manoj is a coffee table book written by Professor Swaminathan, founder of Tamil Heritage Trust, coffee table book on Mamanlapuram. It is also available in the bookstall at the entrance. We move on to our next lecture on the sculptures of Vijayanagara period. To deliver this lecture, we have Mr. Arjun Bardwaj. Mr. Arjun Bardwaj is a writer, translator and researcher with a deep interest in classical literature, arts and philosophy. An engineer by training, he is well versed in Sanskrit, in which he did his masters, Kannada, English, German and Greek. Mr. Arjun works as a contributing editor of Preksha and is currently studying the comparative aesthetics of classical Greek and Indian arts. He has co-written and translated many books and authored over 50 research articles related to science, arts and philosophy. He enjoys composing poems and plays the flute. He is also a visiting faculty at many universities and educational institutions. Mr. Arjun has taught courses and conducted workshops on the Natya Shastra, Artha Shastra, Kala Tattva, Puranas, Sanskrit literature, Indian sciences and also on temple art. He composes lyrics for dance, music and theatrical compositions. Welcome, Mr. Arjun.